this great panel, and this seminar is recorded. It is hosted by NSPA, Northern Sparsely Populated Areas, together with North Sweden European Office, North Norway European Office, and East North Finland. It is a seminar on the Deforestation Regulation, which was adopted in June 2023. It will come into effect 2025. So the purpose today is to discuss the implications of this regulation in regards of woody biomass trade. As you know, it's also about lots of foods, but we don't concentrate on that today. NSPA represents some of the most forested regions in Europe, and therefore we wanted to bring together EU policymakers and bioeconomy stakeholders from the north to discuss the implications of this regulation. My name is Gulin Kadina Christensen. I work here at the office, North Sweden European Office in Brussels, and I will be leading this seminar. The industry and also the surrounding world have aired many questions on this extensive regulation, and hopefully we can address some of them here today. I just want to give a short introduction to the issues at hand and then leave the floor to the legal experts, industry, and to the EU Commission. Just wanted also to say that we tried really hard to get the environmental representatives participating. This regulation stems from DG Environment in the EU Commission, and they could unfortunately not attend. We are instead very happy to have the EU Commission represented by Mrs. Delphine Salade from DG Trade. We're very happy to see you here.
Thank you very much.
We tried also to invite representatives from the NGOs, environmental NGOs, and they said very friendly that they did not have enough knowledge on this regulation to join today. And this proposal for this regulation came right after the biggest, largest climate package ever, Fit for 55. And we think that many biomass stakeholders, including the environmental groups, the NGOs, may not have had the time to catch up on all the details. So I think an event like this is very important. Also wanted to say that forestry per se is not the global driver of deforestation. Change of land use is. When you take the land and you cut down the trees, you do something else with it. That's create deforestation, not forestry. Still, forestry gets quite regulated from 2025, just shortly. All woody biomass products need a declaration, deforestation free. Geolocalization, a declaration on where each tree were harvested. Forests that look natural to the eye and have no major signs of human interference will be called primary forest and cannot be harvested and replanted. Any trade with forest biomass and its products will come with liability from 2025. And NSPA is a very forested area. Our economies depend on forestry. So one of our concerns is how this legislation will affect, or this regulation will affect our strive in the Arctic region for a circular, bio-based, sustainable economy. So we have a great panel. Sara Nordin, lawyer from White & Case law firm. We have Mrs. Delphine Salade, as I introduced, from DG Trade. We have Maja Rantamäki, Manager of International and EU Forest Affairs from the Finnish Forest Industries. We have Gordon Murray coming all the way from Canada, in Western Canada, which is very much further than Eastern Canada. Executive Director of the Wood Pellets Association of Canada. And we have Jonas Larsson, Head of Customer Supply at the Swedish Forest Corporation, Södra Cell International. So welcome to the first speaker, Sara Nordin from White & Case law firm. I know you have looked closely into this regulation, and you're also born in northern Sweden.
I am.
In Jämtland. Are you a forester?
I am not.
You're not a forester?
I'm an honorary. I grew up with a lot of forests surrounding me.
Yes.
And now I understand how this can create issues. So I'm very intrigued by this deforestation regulation.
Okay.
But otherwise, no expert. I will leave the expertise when it comes to forestry to the true experts here.
Okay. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I am a lawyer at a big law firm called White and Case. And what I specialize in is trade compliance and the diligence that companies have to do, especially when we have regulations of this sort. So, and I know that especially this regulation has a lot of details, a lot of information to sift through. So there are challenges in just understanding what is the scope and what does it cover, etc. So I figured it was useful just to go through a few slides to start, to explain some of the key concepts and what the regulation entails, basically to set the stage for the further discussion, and especially Delphine also speaking about this from a commission perspective. So usually when there is a regulation of this kind, we get a lot of companies not just looking at it from a forestry perspective, but also the other products that are covered by this regulation. We get a lot of questions from companies in different industry sectors, in different parts of the supply chain, asking, what exactly do I need to do? And what this regulation is quite unique in is that it sets out in very specific detail some of the diligence and risk assessment requirements that companies will need to adhere to. There are still details that need to be figured out, and where the Commission will step in and produce more guidelines, I'm sure, and further delegated or implementing acts. But just looking at what we have now, we can figure out at least some of the obligations that companies will have. What we can say from a company and diligence perspective is that companies will be expected to perform extensive diligence in relation to the products that they either place on the market in the EU or products that they are exporting from the EU. So it applies not just to imports, but also, as I'm sure other panel members will comment on, actual producers in the EU that are exporting products. So the key restrictions that we're looking at, just looking at the key concepts here, what exactly do we need to comply with? It's that the specific products that are covered by the regulation, which are set up by tariff code, so very important for a company to look at specifically the products that are listed in the regulation. What do they need to do? They need to make sure that these products are deforestation free, and we'll get back to that in a second. Also, that they have been produced in accordance with the local legislation in the country of production. So looking at what is the legal framework there and has it been complied with, essentially. And then what companies will need to do is to produce a due diligence statement. And of course, there has to be a basis for that statement. So that statement will need to cover basically point 1 and 2 in the information that the company has surrounding these elements. The regulation has entered into force. However, the main obligations will not apply until a little more than a year from now. So companies have time to prepare for this. The Commission will also need to set up an information system where companies will need to register and submit the required information. So there is quite a lot of work that needs to be done now between now and December 2024, when the main aspects will start to apply. The Commission will also be tasked with to assist the diligence and the risk assessment that companies will need to perform in basically doing a country ranking system where countries are ranked in order to essentially guide companies as they perform this diligence and risk assessment. There are some, as I said, the regulation is very detailed, so we're giving the broad strokes here. There are various exceptions to take into account, especially when we're looking at, for example, lumber and lumber products and etc., and exactly from which date the obligations start to apply. But then looking at diligence specifically and what we see based on our experience, looking at, for example, in the past couple of years, diligence has been a hot topic when it comes to economic sanctions and the diligence that companies have to perform in that context. So what is different here based on what we see in the regulation? So deforestation free is a very specific concept that I'm sure that other panel members will delve into exactly what that means. What exactly would you need to be looking at in that sense? But then looking at, if we look at the diligence perspective of what is happening in the country of production, as an importer, for example, of the product, you will need to look at the laws in the country of production relating to, for example, land use rights, human rights, customs and trade law. Has that been complied with? Basically export regulations as the products are being exported from there. So that is one area which is interesting to see as part of the diligence that companies will perform. Then just looking at the due diligence requirements, which are written into the regulation and that will need to be part of this due diligence statement that companies will need to produce. Companies will need to get to a point where they feel that there is no or only negligible risk of non-compliance. This is a little bit of a new concept compared to the diligence principles that we have in other trade compliance areas. But I sense that the concept is similar to what we have, for example, in trade compliance for sanctions, in that no basis for concern. But we know that the questions that companies will have around that is, what is enough? When I have information in front of me, how can I say that there's no basis for concern? I already touched upon that there are these risk assessment and risk mitigation obligations that are part of the due diligence that companies need to perform. And what's interesting in the risk assessment is, for example, this country ranking that the Commission will produce that is supposed to aid companies as they look at the potential risk of the supply of the covered products. However, there are many elements in addition to that the companies will need to consider as they perform the risk assessment. Audits are potentially a part of it as well, in that in order to mitigate risk as a company, what you could potentially do is to have a third party audit your supply chain. But obviously, as I touched on in the very beginning, companies are in a different position when it comes to this, as to whether they even have access to the very extensive data that they are expected to collect. So, for example, where exactly and when was the product produced? What we see is new in this regulation as well is that to a large extent, the diligence that companies are expected to perform and the results from that, some of it will be public information. And if we look at trade compliance under the frameworks that we have today, that's not necessarily the case. Companies are generally not expected today to produce a statement, for example, on their website as to what is the diligence system that they have in place. But that is a trend that we're seeing more and more in these new instruments. And then there will be these checks by the national authorities. Any judgments stemming from that will be posted on the web. So non-compliant companies there will be information about that on the web eventually, and aspects like that, which are interesting to see, because that's not something that we see today. So just very quickly, to leave the floor to other panel members, just to remind what exactly are the products that are covered. So there's a distinction between commodities and examples of products. And again, as I said, it's all listed by tariff code. So for companies to closely consider what exactly is the tariff code of the products that they import into the EU or export out of the EU. So that's an example. What is interesting to see in the regulation, though, is that it's already contemplated that there might be expansion. And one example that is specifically mentioned in the regulation is biofuels. So that's an assessment that will happen towards 2025. And it will be interesting to see based on how this regulation is implemented, what will be the scope for potential expansion. It feels like companies already will have a lot to deal with. So yeah, so that will be interesting to see. But with that, happy to hand over to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Gordon, all the way from Canada, I know you do export some, at least wood pellets to European countries.
We do.
Who are the buyers?
We sell industrial wood pellets for power generation into Belgium, Netherlands, Denmark, some into the United Kingdom, which they need to comply with the EUDR because they're trading on the market.
Yeah.
Some into France, Italy as well. So
Yeah,
quite a
so
few
we're
countries.
a little bit energy dependent
Yeah.
on you. Okay, okay, floors is yours.
I had a few slides there too.
I think I gave you
Hopefully they're just in
Gordon.
the lineup.
They should be, no?
I don't think I've been sent your slide.
No, I
So we,
sent them over.
Here, but I'll
Uh,
them.
are they important? Shall we go to the next speaker and see if we can arrange with the slides, or can you take it without slides?
Well, I guess I can take it without
Yeah,
slides.
sure, do
I
We're sorry.
I was
Sorry
happy,
about that. Must have been some misunderstanding, but please go ahead without slides.
happy to hear.
I
from-
think you're an excellent.
Yeah, okay. From Sarah that her understanding as an expert of the regulation pretty much confirms most of what we're thinking. So there was no big surprises there. I'm sure that probably doesn't mean much from a non-lawyer trying to advise a lawyer, but anyway, I think you're on the right track. So I'm quite happy to be here today and be able to give a bit of perspective on the Canadian views on the EU Deforestation Regulation. And just a little bit about our association, our industry. So as an association, we represent all the pellet producers across Canada, as well as the allied industry. So like trading companies, ports, stevedoring companies, equipment suppliers, and so on, everybody that makes the industry go around. And, our primary focus as an industry is on demonstrating sustainability, because we know how important it is for public acceptance of what we do. And also lots of focus on safety and quality and reliability and so on. We've got around 50 pellet plants across the country, shipping around 3.5 million tons globally, which around 50% comes into Europe or the United Kingdom. And about 90% of what we do produce is exported. So export market's very important to us. Europe, super important to us. We employ around 3,000 Canadians. Most of our production is in rural and indigenous communities. And so I'll start so anyway, I want to talk a bit about sustainable forest management. So it's vital for us to have a continuing industry, that we do have sustainably managed forests, and that the public is supports what we do. So the whole notion of ensuring that products that are put on the market are deforestation free, and that we are not causing degradation is worthy of support. And we think the EU's on the right track. And we're committed to making sure that all trees go to the highest and best use. Sometimes publicly you hear that we're out there cutting forests down to make wood pellets. Nothing could be further from the truth. We use just byproducts, sawdust, shavings, and all of our material is sourced from sawmills. So we're not the ones out actually directly managing the forest, although we're expected to supply information to our customers, who are the ones that have to comply with the regulation. So we don't directly have to comply, but if we want to sell our product to our customers, we're going to have to supply the information that they're looking for, right? So just focusing on the EUDR, one of the big challenges for us is treatment of the so-called primary forests. And in the Canadian context, we don't really manage primary forests per se. We have our own classification system, so that's not a particularly helpful term to us. However, if we use the EUDR definition, the EUDR, short for Deforestation Regulation, it considers the conversion of primary forests into planted forest as degradation, so not allowed. Seems to make sense. However, in Canada, we have vast forest areas. You can't imagine how big Canada is, subject to forest fires. I mean, a lot of people know we had the worst forest fire season ever. We have windstorms, insect damage. The trees blow down or they're standing there burnt up. So under this regulation, we would not be allowed to restore those forests. We wouldn't be allowed to replant those forests because that would be degradation. I mean, how does that make sense to anybody that we couldn't replant the burnt forest because it would be considered as degradation? And then, you know, we encourage the EU authorities to recognize Canada's science-based approach to forest classification. So, you know, we've got our own way of deciding which forests are what, and it's all decided by multiple levels of government with public and Indigenous input. It's an integrated approach that considers environmental, economic, and Indigenous reconciliation benefits. And moreover, under the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, the sovereignty of Indigenous people is being recognized in the forest. So we're increasingly recognizing the sovereignty within Canada and giving the Indigenous people the right to determine which areas are to be harvested and managed and how. And yet, under this regulation, the EU seemingly seeks to overrule the rights of Canadian Indigenous people, which we're not too sure about that. And just a quick statistic is, in terms of reduction of Canadian forest area due to deforestation or degradation, is less than 0.5% since 1990. So essentially, the forests are exactly the same today as they were in 1990. A second challenge is the geolocation. So every product, you got to trace back to its original spot. So you take an individual little piece of wood pellet. It's about 2 or 3 centimeters long by 6 millimeters wide. It's got hundreds of particles in that single pellet. And so you take a batch of pellets and you take them to the port in a rail car. There's millions and millions and millions of particles that have come from thousands or even millions of plots of land. And then when it reaches the port, it goes into a silo and it's mixed with pellets from up to 15 other suppliers also. So you could have up to 15 suppliers filling up a vessel. So you quickly get into the billions and billions of particles that could come from millions of plots of land. And typically you'll carry an inventory for, say, 3 months. And so you have to report either your date of production or your range of dates of production. So, if we were to send a shipment, we could potentially be supplying easily in the hundreds of thousands of plots of land, which would be attached to a specific shipment. And we really don't understand what that's telling anybody in the regulation in terms of deforestation. So that is a challenge. Nevertheless, we're, as Canadians, I mean, we're talking to Europeans, but we accept that the law will be essentially operational by the end of next year, and so we're going to figure out how to comply. We've got to put some pretty heavy duty computing tools to try to track all this. And so 95% of Canadian forests are government owned, and they're allocated through different types of tenure systems. And so we've got to work through the sawmills and come up with some sort of an information system that's going to track all this. And we're looking for some government support there, given that the government is the landholder. In terms of the risk ratings, so there's a low, I think, standard risk, and then high risk, and it, depending on what your risk rating is, it determines the frequency of the checking plus the degree of due diligence that's required. You get a simplified due diligence requirement if you're in a low risk. So, we would, hope that Canada's track record, we would be able to convince the European Union that we should fit into the low risk category.
Yeah.
I'm mindful of the
Okay,
time. Okay.
okay.
I mentioned that the First Nations, so we're implementing UNDRIP right now. So, I guess I don't need to beat that to death. We don't need the EU telling our Indigenous people on how to manage their forests. Another just fact that could complicate this somewhat is that we've got a comprehensive economic trade agreement between Canada and Europe that's been signed by with 28 member states when the UK was in, now 27. It's been ratified by 7 states. It's provisionally in force right now. And that provides for mutual recognition of environmental laws and how we manage this. And so I'm looking to see how our Canadian government negotiates that with Europe, and possibly there's a way of us not having to comply strictly to the terms of the EUDR, but possibly be able to present evidence from a Canadian perspective. I mean, that's a bit pie in the sky at the moment. And I think that's most, I mean, all our advocacy on this has been through our government, and so, we talk to our government. Governments are talking to the folks in the commission and in Parliament and so on. And we hope we end up with a workable solution at the end of it.
Yeah, we have an energy crisis, and obviously we need your energy. So it'll be sad if you need to keep it, and then the forest they burn, and it won't help the climate very much.
Exactly.
No, okay, well, thank you. Next speaker is Jonas Larsson, Head of Customer Supply at Södra Cell International. I know you export a lot of pulp from Sweden. What is pulp used for?
We produce both paper pulp and dissolving pulp. So we can say paper pulp could be used for producing medical packages, labels for any bottles or jars, sanitary applications and so on. But and also the dissolving pulp, it's basically used for producing textile fibers or threads, and like going into shirts, and why not linings for jackets.
Thank you.
Let's see if this one works. No, that's the other way around.
There you go.
Okay. I want to set the scene. I come from a forest owner association called Södra. We are located in the southern part of Sweden, from Stockholm and southwards. And we are owned by 52,000 forest owners, private forest owners. In total, our owners represents 10% of the forest land in Sweden. And a typical forest member of Södra is on a long-term commitment to owning his or her forest. It's been owned for generations by this family, and actually the image supports that. The older man being the father of the lady on the right-hand side, which is the mother to the lady in the middle, which is the mother of the 2 sons in the middle. Our members, I would say in general, are humble to the need of being more efficient, doing things better tomorrow than we did today or yesterday, and also proud of the achievements being done in his or her forest. And one aim for, I would say, many of our of our members are to hand over a forest plot in a better state than they inherited or bought. Managing the forest for our members, it's natural to combine both biodiversity with, let's say, efficient resource management. In this short speech, I'll reflect over two things because I think the EU DRR covers so much. And I'll start with traceability. Let's see if it works. Yeah. Trying to set the scene. Going from the left here, Södra, we handle about 10 million cubic meters from our members every year. That equals 250,000 truck deliveries in a year. The lower parts of the trees harvested, they are the most valuable part for a forest owner. That's where we take out the raw material to produce plank and board and so on. So that is the driver of activities in forest. The upper part of the tree, the thinner part, that's used for pulp production. Because when we fell a tree, there is not only the lower part, but the higher part is being used in a good way. So that goes to the pulp mill. But when we saw a log, the round log can't be fitted into square planks. So all the shavings outside, the white parts, they are also used in producing pulp. So they go as wood chips to the pulp mill. Now this is one of our mills. It receives approximately 250 truckloads every day. Comes in down in the left-hand side, and when a truck arrives, the load will be handled by a truck, forklifter, you could say, and put into the wood yard on the lower left-hand side. That's where we store the round wood. A certain time later, the wood is moved into the wood chipper. The wood from the specific delivery is mixed, you could say, with other deliveries. And we'll then make these wood chips, and they are all transferred into these big piles over at the left-hand side. From the wood piles, the wood chips are transported into the pulp mill for producing. But it's not from the top part of the mill, of the pile, but from the bottom part. All in all, at a normal stage, we have an average inventory of these two, you could say, sources of raw material of 8 + 6 days. So like 2 weeks of inventories for producing pulp. That's the normal storage for us here. The individual deliveries on the left-hand side there, it can come from Johan Olsson, 40 cubic meters, or from Anna Svensson, 40 cubic meters. We have good knowledge about the plots from which these logs have been harvested. We know quite a lot about that. But then the individual deliveries are mixed in the process. So I'm kind of supporting Gordon here. Because when the first truck is brought in and it's lifted into the wood yard, it's mixed together with some other deliveries in one of these long rows. And you can imagine what happens when the wood chipper chips the logs into 3-4 centimeter big chips. They are mixed. And then it goes to the chip piles. And there a chip could be lying any time between a couple of hours to 2 months or 4 months. Because these piles are always full. Or we could say they are never empty. And then in the pulping process, the chips are turned into fibers, disintegrated, and this leads to okay, I will take that one. This leads to a challenge in tracing the actual individual deliveries for 1 ton of pulp or 1 bale of pulp. I want to underline that we do have good knowledge in the Swedish forestry about the individual harvesting sites. We have a very good developed system for nationwide. We need to develop it when it comes to including the geolocation information, polygons for individual harvesting sites. But in the wood pulp process, wood is mixed. We need to keep that in mind. And a pulp mill runs a continuous process. There's not a beginning nor an end of the process. It's ongoing all the time. I'll get back to the second bullet there in the next slide, I think. So the last bullet here, the challenge in practical traceability is through the process of producing pulp. So I ask myself, is this the assumption in the regulation that we know that one truck is delivered at a specific time and then another truck is delivered at a specific time and it follows all the way through the process? No, it's not like that. This is what it looks like in reality. Material for 1 hour of production is mixed out of hundreds or maybe thousands of plots, which gives us a challenge on what kind of granulated information should we provide in the individual delivery. And I'll just like to mention a second challenge. I think confidentiality for us is a key thing also, because we are acting on an open market towards our members and other suppliers, as well as towards our customers. And I would say information about the delivery chain, business relations, not maybe formal agreements, but any smart guy could add up things and make a really good business map out of picking information. So we think that given the strong competition legislation in EU, we expect that information should be confidential in the delivery chain. And I think I'm over now.
Thank you so much. Now we have Maija Rantamäki, Manager of International EU Forest Affairs from the Finnish forest industries. Jonas was telling us that he's representing 52,000 forest farmers. In Finland, you have 600,000, I believe, or more than 600,000 small forest owners.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
So we have 600,000 private forest owners in Finland. They own approximately 60% of the forest area in Finland. And obviously, from the forest industry point of view, that's a very important source of our raw material for the industry. And that's one core question also that I'm going to attach on my speech of this topic. So
go ahead.
Thank you so much. I think that Jonas already covered quite a lot of my points too, and I can totally agree of the points and concerns that our fellow panelists have highlighted during their speeches. But maybe if I just shortly introduce our organization. So Finnish Forest Industries Federation represents some 60 member companies, forest industry companies operating in Finland. We have a little bit over 140 forest industry mills in Finland, and they mainly procure their wood nationally and mainly from those private forest owners. The companies produce a wide spectrum of different wood-based products, all the way from the sawmill industry to the pulping and paper, cardboard industry, and also the innovative wood-based products. And the impact of our industry is huge for the economy and for the whole society of Finland. So we employ over 70,000 people, Finnish people, mostly in rural areas. And I think it's worthwhile to mention that we are 5 million people living in Finland. So that's quite a share. But maybe going into this topic of this very important discussion today, I think it's important to highlight that and make very clear that Finnish forest industry supports all the actions against deforestation. So halting deforestation is our primary goal. If we don't have forests, if we don't have wood available, we are not going to have also the forest industry in Finland. So that's our core tasks. So nevertheless, we also have some concerns related to this regulation for the interpretations of the regulation and the obligations, as well as the practical implementation of it. And I would like to highlight three main points on our behalf, where the first one actually attaches the topic where Jonas, or which Jonas raised, like the last one. So to be compliant with the EU competition law, also with these obligations. And I think that here we can connect something that we heard from both of the previous speakers. So that once the single tree from a single plot of land has been cut into different timber crates, there is one operator, one company who's doing the harvesting, but obviously the one company don't necessarily always need the all timber crates, but they can sell the other timber crates to their competitor. And from that beginning, we are talking about sensitive information and sharing of sensitive information if they need to share the geolocalization coordinates of their own procurement areas when providing the information, like along the supply chain. So that's definitely something what we need to clarify in the implementation of this regulation. So the competition law compliance and point of view and how to tackle that problem of the implementation. The second point attaches administrative burden. I think that Jonna just showed a great picture of the value chain and the streams, the raw material streams, how they get mixed in the process. So our industry does over 100,000 wood buying contracts annually in Finland. And obviously it means that there are many plots of lands where they buy the wood. And then when the raw material gets mixed, in the end of the day, as Jon said, in a single pulp bale, there will be like thousands, tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands reference numbers attached to it. So the question really is that are we here halting deforestation, global deforestation, or are we actually creating administrative burden for the industry, but also for the member countries? My third point is about the timetable of the application, and there we come more like to the practical level of the implementation. So we have the regulation in force at the moment. We know that there is the transition time until the end of next year. But when we look at the forest industry and that value chain, we might have wood procurement and harvesting going on today, which will end up to a product later than when the regulation is already in force, and we need to be compliant with that. So beginning of 2025. And that's something we need to take into account now and very much consider now, is that we don't have, for example, the traces system in place. Our companies cannot provide due diligence statements at the moment, but they might put on the market products in the beginning of 2025, where the raw material they have procured today. So that's really something that we need to create solutions on, how those companies then can show for their customers that they are compliant with the regulation. But those are my 3 points. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great to hear all of you talking about your angle to this regulation. Is Delphine Salad? I've seen you making notes there all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah, is there anything special that comes into mind here, or is it new to you, these things, or
No,
no?
well,
You heard it.
well, first, let's me
Maybe
say
I'm
who I,
surprised.
no, there is no surprise. Well,
Yeah.
but maybe first should I say who I am,
Yes,
meaning
please.
that
Please.
I'm Delphine Salah. I'm working for DG Trade, so the Trade Department in the European Commission. As it was mentioned, the EU Deforestation Regulation is an environment initiative led by the department responsible for environmental policy. But indeed, the Trade Department has been involved from the very start of the regulation to ensure that it is WTO compliant with our international commitments, including, of course, one of our flagship, CETA, and as minimally trade disruptive as possible. But those are things, I guess, I will be touching upon in the presentation. It should be there. So let's try.
It's one of the arrows, I think.
That's it. Okay. So my apologies if because I've heard lots of very interesting things already. So my apologies if I repeat things that were already said, because a lot was already said. And if I don't answer already all the questions, because I tried to take some notes, but some you may have to come back to them in the discussion. Though, as I mentioned, I'm an economist, I'm from the Trade Department. I'm an economist by background. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an environmental specialist. I'm one of the person who contributes to make that, wants to contribute making that regulation meet its environment goal in the least trade disruptive manner, but I probably won't have an answer to all your questions. One of the reasons I'm here is indeed to help put things in perspective, underline why this regulation, answer, clarify as much as possible the requirements, and of course, answer as many of your questions I can answer directly, and those that but in these, I'm here to also listen to the questions to which I don't have an answer, so that we reflect on them and we come with the answer. So bear with me if not everything is answered today. Sorry. So first, no, I want the objectives first before the main element. That's interesting. Okay, now I don't understand. Okay, it seems that my slide objective has disappeared. So before I go into the main elements of the regulation, I guess I should present the objectives. Sorry if I go back to the brick macro picture. We heard a lot about the implementing challenges. But before we go into that, I should underline that the purpose of that regulation is to address the deforestation and forest degradation risk. The deforestation and forest degradation are important drivers of climate change and biodiversity loss. When we communicated, you said that you were going to ask me a more personal question, which is that I do have
Canada.
exactly.
Yeah.
I do have a
Yeah,
link to
true.
Canada.
True.
And I was going to say
Yes.
Canada knows the consequence of climate change. Canada indeed had horrible fires this summer. There have always been wildfires, but these years wildfires were beyond imagination. I'm talking about Canada, Greece had fires. I'm not going to mention all the consequences of climate change. We all know them. But so we all know that we have to take the actions to address that. All studies that reducing global deforestation and forest degradation will contribute to limiting, to addressing the climate change. That was repeated again in the Glasgow Declaration, whereby 141 countries committed to stop forest degradation by 2030. So I think everybody, and I heard today all speakers mentioning the commitment to sustainability and sustainable forest management. So I don't think the question is why. I guess the question is how. And in this respect, I would like to underline that studies show that 90% of deforestation is provoked by the expansion of agricultural land. Expansion of agricultural land linked in particular to a series of commodities the EU is a major consumer of. And as one of the main players in the world, it's the EU responsibility to address its own responsibility. There's a bit of repetition there. The objective of the regulation is to minimize the risk that products from supply chain associated with deforestation and forest degradation are placed on the EU market or exported from it. And I would like to underline that the obligations are on the operators. The obligations are on placing products on the EU market. They were requested by EU citizens. All major EU initiatives are supported or are preceded by an impact assessment and public consultation. We had 100,000 response to the public consultation, which is the biggest number of respondents we ever had to a public consultation. So this regulation is a response to a request from the citizens. I'm going to go through some elements of the regulation, and I know that some of the some elements are considered as burdensome. I should underline for those who followed the legislative process that you may have seen that it's during the discussion with the co-legislator, meaning the European member states and the European Parliament, that some elements were expanded, like for instance, the product scope. So we are with this regulation responding to a political demand. And I should underline that the regulation applies to products put on the market, on the EU market, i.e. we're not imposing anything on third countries. And I do hear what a number of third countries are saying, and I do have a lot of sympathy, having lived in Canada, for the right of indigenous people, but we're not imposing anything on indigenous people or on third countries. We are making sure that the EU consumers have the products that they asked for, i.e. deforestation free. And with this regulation, not only we want to respond to that demand from our consumers, we want also to increase the demand for trade in legal and deforestation free products. So it's also to support the development of these key elements. Now, in terms of the main elements, so the regulation was entered into force end of June. It will enter into application end of 24, this end of December 24, meaning 18 months after entry into force, meaning a quite significant transition period. We do hear that concerns about the transition period, and we're going to try to answer them, but at least there is still a year to answer some of the questions asked. 26 more months for small enterprises, and here we're not talking about producers, we're talking about small SMEs putting the products on the EU market. So by January 25, only products that are both deforestation free and legal will be allowed on or exported from the EU market. The commodities covered, as we know, is palm oil, soy, wood, cattle, cocoa, coffee, and rubber, which was added by the co-legislators, and some of their derived products. As my colleagues said, the exact list is in Annex 1, I think, of the regulation. So you can refer to that. Anything that is not in Annex 1 is not covered. We do sometimes have questions on, is this covered or not? This is public. This is Annex 1. There will be a review. There will be, in fact, several reviews, including one on the product coverage. Well, the first one will be on the type of land, other wooded land. Second review will be on possible extension to other products. And the third review will be a review of the overall regulation. Why these reviews? Again, because that was asked by the co-legislators asked us to include additional elements to the regulation. We said we can't do that because those elements were not part of the impact assessment. Before we add anything to the initiative, we have to analyze the reasons for these elements and the impact of adding these. Oh, I'm running out of time. So, okay, I'm going to try. So that's why I would say those are why these reviews, because we had a political request, but we could not agree. Well, it cannot be adopted without a thorough analysis. Cutoff date, why is it important? It means that any land, we're looking at deforestation after 2020. So land that was deforested 30 years ago is not included in the scope. Main elements, non-discrimination. This is a key element for the lawyers, not the trade lawyers. This is a key element of the compliance with the WTO rules. The regulation applies both to domestically produced and to imported commodities, derived products, exactly the same way. As I mentioned, it applies to the obligations on operators and traders, not on third countries. They can have the rules they want, but their products will enter the EU market only if they comply with the EU regulation. Traceability, another element is, of course, traceability. This issue has been discussed a lot. Maybe I'll try to answer some of the questions later, but in the presentation, that's not. Legality, that was said. Mandatory due diligence. Yeah, mandatory due diligence statement. They are to be provided when the product is put on the EU market. You don't need to do a mandatory due diligence statement today. The due diligence statement should accompany the product when it's put on the market for the transition. Yeah.
We should start the questioning period, otherwise we will late for the meeting.
Okay, was there something else that, yeah, main elements, no ban against any country or commodity. Benchmarking system, oh, that's not something that was asked a lot. Yeah, maybe that was mentioned by you. Do you want me to answer it quickly? The benchmarking system whereby third countries of origin, and that will apply, by the way, to EU member states, any third country, will classify high risk, standard risk, low risk of deforestation. As of entry into force, all countries were classified as standard risk. The benchmarking, the classification will be based on a series of criteria that are in the regulation, quantitative criteria and qualitative criteria. This will be based on a thorough analysis, including consultation with the third countries. And we hear that Canada, of course, as a couple of other countries, do expect to be low risk. All this will be discussed. The basis of the methodology is public. We are still in the process of finalizing the contract with the contractor who will provide us with additional information. So there may be a delay in the adoption of the classification. In the meantime, everybody stays at standard.
Yeah, we have to move on. We have to let in the audience.
Yeah.
They're promised.
No, it was just trying
Yes.
to answer some of the questions.
Yeah. Yeah, but
Sorry,
there will be more questions.
there is one, this element, sorry, frequently asked questions. This, if you have one thing to retain from my presentation, go to frequently asked questions. Many of the questions you asked are, the answers are there.
Okay, but maybe there, Maria, you have net audience in Czech, I believe. Other questions or discussions or anything?
Yeah, there's some
Yeah,
questions coming in. Let me just stop sharing that.
Yeah, and also maybe we have any hands here. If you have any questions to the panel, yeah, please go ahead.
Stefan Meitinger, German Farmers Association. You mentioned that a lot of consumers are asking for no deforestation on the world, but this causes a lot of bureaucracy, as we heard. So what do you think are the consequences? Because deforestation will go on. Maybe we'll create two markets, one for the European market and the rest goes wherever to China because we don't care about it. So we also think about these consequences and also about this big mountain of bureaucracy, because in case of the wood pellets, it's close to impossible to say this is coming from this forest and this free, and how should it work?
Yeah, just for the web audience, we need to repeat the questions because of the sound, and I see if I can repeat it. But your question is whether we create two global markets, one that would suit for this quite bureaucratic regulation, and one that China will run, so to speak, to be frank. And you're also asking about these issues with geolocalization that seem like pretty impossible, and how would that work? I guess that's a question for Mrs. Delphine Salad, I guess, or to all of them.
Yeah.
Anybody would like to reply to that? The risk for two global markets.
Well, I could just comment.
Would you sell everything to United States instead? I know they want your pellets
Well,
too.
I mean, that quite frankly, there is a structural deficit globally in for wood pellets and supply for power plants, conversions, and so on. So, I mean, if it becomes too difficult to sell to the EU, then we do have options.
Yeah, you can sell to other parties.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. I was like the prices for wood pellets are skyrocketing, completely skyrocketing, and we do give subsidies to people to buy pellets burners. So they could be quite expensive to burn your home then. Yeah, do you have up to two global, the risk for that? Anybody want to dive into that? No. Do you have another question do you have a question from the net?
Yeah, I have several questions here.
Yeah.
Active participation. The first one is that was asked during Mr. Murray's input. It was if planted forest and plantation forest are different things. Is there a mix-up of terms?
I'd like to respond to that.
Okay.
So there's a degree. So if you plant a forest, some forests in some parts of the world are planted as monocultures. So they're single planted in a row. So you're reducing biodiversity. You're taking multiple species and replacing it with a single species that's susceptible to disease and reduction of bioenergy and so on. And that's not what we're talking about in the Canadian case. like when we plant, we use seed from that similar zone. So, you know, latitude, longitude, and it's high quality seed, and we plant multiple species to match the species composition that was there originally. So I think we're talking about two different concepts.
Yeah, it's also a question of the land. If you plant trees on farmland, they will be pretty much a monoculture. But if you forest land is like heaps of seeds in the ground that will
Yes, and
it's very
planted,
hard to create
right.
monoculture in
I
forest.
should
land.
also say that planted forests are supplemented by the natural seed that grows, and so you know, you'll plant the seeds, and then it'll fill in from all the other seed that blows around, so you end up with a multi-species healthy forest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Since we're talking about EUDR, maybe I would like to come back to your question on what happens to the forests that have burned, and then I would refer you to the answers that are put on the Commission website under the frequently asked question. Deforestation is defined as conversions of forests to agricultural use. So that means that a forest that has experienced a fire and then subsequently is converted into agricultural land, that would be considered as deforestation. But if the affected forest is allowed to regenerate, it is not deforestation.
Okay, that's deforestation, but if you go further on and you look at degradation, the conversion of primary to planted is considered to be degradation.
Absolutely.
And that,
yeah, but that's not the.
So if we burn a primary forest through a lightning strike and we plant it, what is that forest degradation or not?
If we don't do it, I understand your question. Then I see very much the point, that I think we are going to clarify that, because I would tend to say that I cannot be quoted, but if it's not human made, I would tend to think that it would be against it. But
well, I know exactly the wording here. There's it is a primary forest means a natural generalized forest of native tree species where it's no clear visibility of indication of human activities, but it can also be, it includes a forest where it's not possible to distinguish whether it's planted or naturally generated. So it comes down to a subjective view of this forest. Whether you think it looks natural or not natural. And if you think it looks natural, you're actually not allowed to harvest and replant. And that would be a major problem for the Northern Hemisphere, both Canada and Sweden. Major problem in my interpretation. You have a question? If you speak loud, I don't have to repeat the question.
Jean-Marc Joseph from Barnage Europe. I have a question mainly for Mrs. Spanner. What bodies will be in charge of the control of this? Because we're seeing the list of products. It covers virtually the entire world. So, yeah, how is it going to happen? With the control, the audits, and the consequence of this, that would be nice.
The national authorities. So it's member states' national authorities that will check compliance of the products with the EUDR, and each member state is to identify its national authority.
One more coming from Indonesia. They will have auditors in Indonesia to see.
No. The products, the control are at the border, at the customs, based on the due diligence statement.
The paper.
But then there will be checks, indeed, at the border. The checks will be at the border. They will be done at like any customs authority, they do checks.
Okay, we have a question down
So
there.
it is, I guess, to clarify,
Yes.
there is specifically envisioned a role for the customs authorities in the regulation, which is common in this type of regulation, because of course goods will be crossing the border, and that's when you have the chance to kind of check them when there is perceived risk. But then I would anticipate that there would be national authorities also, which, as Delphine points out, will have to be appointed. It can vary from one member state to another exactly what that authority is, because there is also envisioned that there will be these checks where that authority will have basically a standard that they will need to meet in terms of checking domestically companies whether they are complying with these diligence requirements. And there's not a specific requirement for the authority to do an audit abroad, for example, but audits abroad could potentially be a mechanism for the company to use to basically verify if you have, for example, a high-risk country, to verify. But then that brings a good question. Is that something that companies will then feel obliged to spend money on? Or can they rely on basically the documentation that they get from these suppliers abroad? So in other words, authorities specifically, I don't see anything in the regulation that they have to perform audits abroad. They basically will need to verify the information that the companies have.
The regulation foresees that we issue guidance to competent authorities before entry into application, which still leaves us a year.
Okay, your turn. If you speak loudly, please.
Tim Hartl, working for CPF, the Confederation of European Forest Owners, and was mentioned the impact assessment that the Commission presented prior to the publication of the proposal. And in our view, this impact assessment had some shortcomings. That's maybe due to the fact that during the legislative procedure, there were a lot of changes. So it cannot be really applied to what we have now in the final text. And there's also some alarming points in it. For example, for the preferred option that we have now in the EUDR, the enhanced due diligence with the tiered system according to benchmarking. It is estimated that the setting up of the due diligence system costs per operator 5,000 to 90,000 euros, which is kind of impossible for smallholders. And now to come to my question, in the review of the EUDR, will there be also the option to reduce bureaucracy, or is it only about adding new types of land, adding new types of products?
Yeah, so how will the review be executed? Will it be more of the same, or will it be changes? That is the question.
Yeah,
well,
to come to the point, but
Okay.
How the review will be executed you can refer to what is in the regulation. I did check the other day exactly, but I don't have it at the top of my mind. If the regulation said that the review will be meant to expand it's not to expand. It's not written to expand the product coverage. It's to analyze.
Yeah. I have a question. We have seen here that some of the, especially the geolocalization and maybe also the replanting, that which is we find odd, so to speak. But if it really doesn't work, if something that the geolocalization, you can't have 1 million sites following a delivery of pellets, as an example, where it came from. So if it's not even possible to do it, that is actually said in regulation. I have to maybe ask Sarah and also Ms. Salot. Is it like, what happens when it's not even possible to do it? What is requested?
We do consider that it is possible. So let's we'll see.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
yeah.
It is possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
It is possible, yeah, from a, let's say, an IT perspective or so, but is it meaningful? What will we be doing with the information that in this bale of pulp, there might be 100,000 plots? What shall we do with the information that one of these 100,000 plots could be a black one?
Yeah, that would.
How do we use the information? So I would like to address what you mentioned, Sara, before, the negligible risk.
Mhm.
Defining that in a way, I think that is a key element in moving forward.
Yeah, that it sort of float into, I'm going to have one question and then we have a question down there. We have a situation now with increased risk in regards to security in Europe. And it seems like an unfortunate time to add a lot of bureaucracy, administration on a resource that we actually do have within Europe. So is that a topic? It's very expensive and not meaningful, and to do all this, and is it like reasonable because this legislation was like written in different times, and now we have a completely different security, lack of energy, to put all this bureaucracy and administration on something that we don't see the point.
You may not see the point, but the analysis showed that it was written at a time where we still expected that we would remain below 1.5 degrees increase in temperature. Today, I'm not so sure that we will. We have to fight. Yeah, we have to take the means to fight climate change, and deforestation is a key source of climate change. That's why we're taking that regulation.
But if you don't replant, you have very slow forest coming up. So
that we do replant. Yes, we do replant.
Okay, please go ahead.
I'm Andrew Georgiou from Enviva. We're a pellet producer based in the US Southeast. On the point of deforestation and the geolocation data for the primary material, we feel that we can comply with that part of the regulation. As you say, it is possible. When it comes to the secondary or tertiary material we take, so the sawdust from a sawmill or leftover material from a pulp mill, which is, they will take in the wood at a sawmill, will sit on the yard for up to a year, will be processed, there's a conveyor belt, collects the sawdust, put it in a transport, and then they will send it to us. That'll make up about 20% of what we put into our wood pellets, and will probably make up about 80 or 90% of the geolocation data points. And you will end up with geolocation data, which essentially covers the entire region. And you won't be able to trace back, because it's sawdust. If you think practically about what sawdust is, we won't be able to say which molecule of sawdust came from which forest. That's not possible to do. You said that you see that it is. I've asked DG Envy as well how we should do it, and they didn't have an answer. And I'm going to assume you don't necessarily have an answer either. So in that case, it is impossible to do. And is the message back to the US authorities then that you don't want to buy our material anymore?
So the question here is that geolocalization is quite complicated.
For the sawdust, I think it's
for the sawdust. Yeah, and then the question is,
it's impossible to trace it back to the source that it came from.
Yeah, I just want to repeat the question for the web audience, that for the products made of sawdust coming from the USA, it's pretty impossible, I understand, to trace it back to the exact farm. And does it mean then that European Union doesn't want any of that product into the market from the United States?
Well, I'm not going to say, I'm not specialist of each and every supply chain. I can confirm that one of the discussions we've had with DG Environment was to ensure that guidance is issued not only horizontal, but per sector specific. And I can confirm that DG Environment is working on that. We have a literal, a stupid debate on whether it will be formal guidance or FAQs. But I fully agree with you. You need answer to your specific issue of your specific supply chain. And I don't have it for sawdust, but we'll be looking. But we are reporting those to DG Environment, and they know that they have to come with product-specific answers.
Okay,
But I think if I can just make a
Yes,
quick comment to
absolutely,
that,
absolutely.
and going back to what Jonas said, you will always, from our experience, when it comes to trade compliance and diligence, you will always have questions like these. And you'll always end up in a situation, from our experience, where you simply don't have all the information that the regulator, for example, might envision that you would have access to, because that's very dependent on the supply chain and where you are in the supply chain and so on. So going back to the standard that Jonas highlighted, is there basically no cause for concern? So you will be put in a situation there, and this we see in various contexts, as a company and as the importer of that product, is the lack of information a cause of concern? Because that supplier is trying to hide something from you? Or is it not a cause of concern because they actually don't have access to that information? And I know from a company perspective, that's not an easy judgment to make. But that's what we see. That's the kind of decision that you're going to have to weigh as a company when you're doing this diligence. And as I said, it's not easy, but that's what you're going to have to try to figure out.
Okay, we have 2 questions left, one from the web and one from the audience, if you still have a question.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, please go ahead, audience.
Question is, we all agree that deforestation has to be fight strongly against that. It's not a point, but the question is, how far is the Commission open to an alternative to geolocalization? Because we have satellite imagery that can be very effective in controlling the land use. And we could imagine that companies could build some tools based on satellite images. That would be common sense for me compared to the geolocalization. So how far is the geolocalization, which is also bringing this confidentiality problem, could be replaced by some other tools?
Satellite imagery will be used, of course. They will be used to identify whether a land has been deforested or not. The geolocation is at the core of the regulation, because that's the element that is necessary to link the commodity to a land to identify. So you will need satellites to see whether the land has been deforested, and the companies can use public data. The Commission will set up a forest observatory, which will be just, it's not a new entity or whatever. It is the publication of a series of monitoring tools like the Copernicus products, other publicly and privately available resources, so that you can identify whether a land has been deforested or not. As for the geolocation, it doesn't have to be very complicated. You just have to take the GPS data. You don't need a huge complex instrument.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point you just highlighted, that it doesn't need to be complicated. And if there is, for example, in the member states systems already in place how to track the procurement areas, for example, I think that's such an important message for us to be sort of able to discuss with the Commission of the usage of those systems in place. So as we already have highlighted that we actually know the procurement areas, that's not a problem at this point, but the issue is that how to track actually from the end product back to the procurement areas, because there will be even millions of those, because we for example, the usage of FIFO principle. So what are the timelines of using that? How many due diligence statements do we need to provide of those raw materials and flows going through? So
okay,
One more question.
With
On geolocation, you just need a phone.
Okay.
You need an
easy.
iPhone.
Listen,
Oh,
I'm
sorry, not
sorry,
iPhone.
I'm sorry.
Any
Area of the plant globally, rather than trying to link indeed the end product with a specific location, which is a challenging. Because you could imagine to have a supply area of a plant and a satellite, an analysis of the risk based on satellite picture. It makes, I have the impression it makes.
Okay, I make one exemption, you, and then the net, and then we're done.
Just want to say, you just need a phone. I've heard this 10 or 12 times now. Just in the forest in the US Southeast a few months ago, must have been in there for about 3 or 4 hours driving to different plots. Didn't have a phone signal once while I was there.
I know.
Yeah, so, yeah, it's not as,
Easy to do, and I think that's perhaps where we're talking at cross purposes. I think when I first read this, I looked at it and I agree, look easy on the face of it. But as soon as you take it to someone on the ground, it does get a lot more complicated. And it's not about being obstructive, because if you look at the record of the US Southeast, we're not deforesting, we're not degrading. It's just the method by which we use to prove it, which is very, very, very challenging. And we'll have massive impacts.
yeah.
Okay, but
Yeah,
on
say-
that-
I'm sorry.
Just on that point, may I answer? I lived in Canada, and indeed I could be without GPS for 1 hour out of Ottawa, but we can still live, and I don't know how we do manage to find our ways. So I guess
Okay.
you will see find
Okay,
a way to find your
maybe United States find their way to solve this sawdust problem. One last question from the net.
Yeah, the EU localization has also been a hot topic
Okay.
in the chat, but maybe I'll move on to a different topic. Can someone give a background on how the EUDR could see the light of day with the massive practical implementation problems that unavoidably will occur? This could not have been unforeseen by the legislator. It seems that us lawyers will make a good, US lawyers will make a good living out of this.
Okay, so that was more statement than a question that the lawyers will have lots to do in the future. Well, thank you for today. Now, all welcome to the mingle, and the gingerbread cookies makes you kind, and all of that we have.